Hi everyone, Max Charvel here, and in this video I wanted to talk about the kind of debate that I've been seeing a bit of about where tone comes from. Does it come from your equipment or does it come from your hands? So if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel, and if you find this video helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Okay, so I think this is a nuanced question. I don't think there's like one correct answer to this, but have you ever heard the saying like a good craftsman doesn't blame their tools? Obviously, there is a big piece of this that is familiarity with your own equipment, right? Knowing what your amp is capable of does come from you, but it's also your equipment. Knowing like, is this amp good for playing this genre, right? There's the question of whether it is or not, and then there's the question of you knowing the limitations of your equipment, right? For example, growing up, I had an amp that couldn't really distort very much. It was my first amp, and I wanted to play some Pantera, and it didn't sound right. The solution was first, I tried putting like a distortion pedal with it, and still didn't sound right. And then finally, I got an amp that could do that kind of tone, and then cool, I could play Pantera now. I think especially if you want to sound like another artist, you kind of have to copy at least some of what their equipment was, right? No matter how good you are, you can't imitate someone else's tone without sort of at least coming close to using the equipment they did. But you can still sound really good, is the thing. So, I had an amp that couldn't really distort, so what did I do? I played some songs that didn't really require a lot of distortion. Maybe they sounded good in their own way, even though it wasn't necessarily really what I wanted to be playing. I think familiarity with your own equipment, knowing what it can and can't do, means that when you want to produce a particular kind of sound that you have in your head, like I want a really nice crunchy sound, or a really metally one, or a really clean one, because you're familiar with your equipment, you know kind of what to go for, right? Like now I have, for example, I have a Fender Squier that I think sounds really good clean, but does not sound very good with a lot of gain. So if I'm in the mood to play clean, that's what I reach for. But if I'm not in the mood to play clean, then I wouldn't reach for it, right? So yes, that is your equipment, or my equipment, but it's also knowing my equipment. It's familiarity with my equipment, right? I would imagine that the majority of musicians that we think of as being really good probably got very used to their own equipment, right? I think I heard someone say, Hendrix played a cheap guitar. I could be wrong about that, but but I bet you he was at least really used to his guitar, right? If he sounded amazing on the guitar that he was used to, and then you handed him a guitar that he had never played before, would he still have sounded amazing? Maybe he would have sounded more awkward, even if it was a more expensive guitar. Maybe he would have, needed some time to get used to it. There's really no substitute for you learning the nuances of your equipment, right? And that's why I think that the whole idea of like where tone comes from, it's kind of not like one or the other. It's not only your equipment. Like with the right equipment, you could instantaneously have the tone you want, versus no matter how, I don't want to say crappy, but no matter what equipment you have, if you're good enough, it won't really matter. Again, I'm going to fall back to my example of having an amp that doesn't really distort, and then you want to play, Pantera, like, it doesn't, there's no way to do it. It doesn't matter how good or bad you are, it's just, you can't do it. You don't have the right equipment. But again, even if you can't get yourself to sound like Pantera, maybe you can, take your amp that doesn't distort and play something else that's better suited for it, right? So, again, a lot of nuance to it. I think, again, if you, I feel like it's kind of a bottleneck. Like you're only as good as like what your equipment will allow you to sound like, right? I mean, to take another obvious example, I mean, if your amp is on the fritz and it's cutting in and out, that's not going to sound good. And it doesn't matter how good you are if your equipment is literally failing in the middle of a show. Um, I mean, maybe there are ways to compensate for that, but I mean, I would say part of being experienced is knowing your equipment enough to know that it's hopefully not going to fail, or being able to compensate for when it does. This is a little bit of a ramble. But yeah, to sum it up, I don't think there's an easy answer. I don't think it's like all equipment or all you. It's just this kind of mixture of both. And again, I think part of it is knowing what sounds you can produce and what you can't. So again, if your goal is to sound exactly like someone else, you might need to make sure that you have similar equipment to what they do. But if you're trying to find your own sound, maybe, the amp that you enjoy playing the most, whether or not it's, expensive, cheap, good, crappy, if it's the sound you like, that's going to be reflected in how you play. So, I think, almost more important than is your equipment good or bad. It's just kind of, do you like the sound of it, and how familiar are you with it, right? Same with guitars. You have a guitar that you get comfortable with. You get comfortable with the fretboard, and then you pick up a different one after playing that one for a few days, and now it feels a little weird because the frets are spaced slightly differently, or the neck's a little bit different, and it's awkward for a little bit, right? And maybe your playing suffers, and it doesn't really matter, if those guitars are expensive or cheap or good or crappy. It's just a question of what you got familiar with, right? I mean, that's why it's practicing is so important, because part of it is getting familiar with the instruments you have. Okay. So that is my take on that. It's a mix between the two. It's a balance. It's not one or the other. That's kind of what I'm trying to say here. It's not with the right equipment you can instantly sound amazing without practicing, and it's also not even with a lot of practice, can you sound like whatever you want without equipment that will help you get there. It's kind of both. It's like you're only as good as the weakest link, so to speak, between your practicing and your equipment. Okay. Well, thank you for watching this kind of disjointed ramble. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And I will see you next time. Goodbye.